do have a clicker from you. Is this on? Are we on? Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me? No? I don't think it is on. It might be on. I don't know. Oh gosh, that's great. Hello? Are we going to start? Should we start? Should we just sit around? I don't know. Hello. Okay. So my name's Dave West. Some of you may have seen me this morning. If you're late, I did this keynote, but you didn't miss anything. It's fine. Apart from Leicester City is the greatest football team in the world. That's the only thing you need to take from that keynote, really. Go Foxes. So what am I going to talk about now? I've kind of done my talking. I'm a bit fed up with talking, but I wanted to talk a little bit about something called ScrumOps. And before I do that, though, I want to say that there's no such thing as ScrumOps. Nothing. So let me just give you a little bit of history. So I was at a DevOps conference in Boston, and there's a guy called Alan Schimmel, who's this large gentleman who runs DevOps.com and is connected to everybody. And we had a dinner with Alan and a few other people. And we were talking about, why are there DevOps conferences? Why is there agile conferences and DevOps conferences and now product conferences and all these separate conferences? And every single conference they start with, you know what we need to do? We need to get everybody to work together better. Let's have a separate conference to talk about that. And I was like, I don't know. I'll have another gin and tonic, please. I have no idea. Anyway, so I wrote a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing called ScrumOps, basically saying, hey, the time is right for ScrumOps. And it caused all sorts of debate, including my half my community going, you just don't understand Scrum, which is fair. I was like, and Ken Schwaber literally came up to me and goes, are you an idiot? Also fair. I was like, well, it's just why have we got Scrum? Why have we got DevOps happening if Scrum is so good? So we started working with the DevOps Institute and started talking to them about how we can better align these communities and how we can get it not to be DevOps good, Scrum bad, Scrum good, DevOps bad, because it doesn't do any good. Exactly what you said earlier. It's not about DevOps or Scrum. It's about delivering amazing software for customers, right? It's about being competitive to Amazon in your case. It's about surviving. It's about being successful and creating an environment for work that is fabulous, right? So we started talking a little bit about that. And so we started thinking about some of the challenges around how Scrum and DevOps, some of the sort of misconceptions, some of the challenges that we have. And I'm going to try to share some of that today. But there's no certification. As much as I would love to create one, there's no book. Ooh, that's a nightmare. I really like writing books because they're great, because they make you feel really important, because you go into a shop and you just name and you're like, cool, that's me. So there's no book. And hopefully there's no hype, or maybe a little bit just in this session now, but that's it over. Because ultimately we're trying to do this. We're trying to become customer-centric. And it's not about Scrum, and it's not about DevOps. It's about satisfying these people because they're all very attractive, apart from him. Anyway, oh, and maybe him. But he's bald, so he must be quite cool. Anyway, so, yeah, I mean, because these people are really a nightmare. And, whether they're, whether they're real human beings or your own users or whatever, which are supposedly human beings, I don't know. But the point is, it's about servicing them, and it's about living in this world. Now, DevOps talks about this continuously. Scrum talks about it. Agile, Kanban talks about it a little bit when it can get away from itself. Safe, it's probably in the diagram somewhere. But the point is, this is what it's all about. That was a little nasty. No, Safe talks about it. Dad talks about it, particularly in the introduction of the book, because I wrote it. We're all about this. And it's about this. So that's one thing that sort of disappointed me from the principles on the previous presentation, which was awesome, was and you're going to get picked on now continuously, sorry. Anyway, I'd like to have seen this more explicit, because it's not just about small batch sizes. It's not about throwing shit out in little batches. It's about looking at the result of that, sorry, did I say shit? Stuff it's about rapid experimentation. It's about understanding. It's about feedback. When you're having a problem, instead of taking longer on it, break it down and try to do it shorter. That's at the heart of everything that we do, right? That's what Scrum is. That's what Agile is. And that's ultimately what we need to get teams and ultimately organizations. That's really hard to do. But if we do that, then why? I'm going to get off slides in a minute because I'm getting bored of slides. But then look at this. This is from my very good friend. Actually, it's Nicole does most of the work, but Jez Humble does. So Jez, part of the British Mafia, you may have read his book, Continuous Delivery. Awesome chap. This is from his work. And what he's talking about is high performance, low performance organizations and medium performance in this State of DevOps survey, which is a great sort of seminal sort of every year they do it. Really good data, which it was kind of interesting. So what we got here is deployment frequency on demand, 1 per week, 1 per month. This is interesting. These are pretty similar. Lead time, less than an hour. We've got that significant. So where do you sit on this? How fast can you deliver to production? How fast can you get feedback? That's what DevOps is all about, right? That's what we're trying to deliver. And that's ultimately what Scrum's all about. It's about delivering frequently to production and getting feedback. Now, it would appear that even though they had the low performance were the same, but the medium was the same, but some of them were obviously across that spectrum. But isn't this worrying? Mean time to recovery, that is ultimately a nasty, that's awful. Because getting stuff to production, fail fast is crucial. I mean, we talked about that in the previous keynote. But if it takes you a week to recover, my God, like when you were young and you go out and get walloped, and you'd take like a morning to get over it. You'd have a lunch and you'd be out on the booze again in the evening. Then you get older, and I don't know about you, but if I get drunk, it takes me about a month to get over it. Certainly the whole weekend, and I still go into work the next day. Now, my mean time to recover means that I can't do that very frequently. If I do it, I have to basically protect an entire period of time, lock my children in the basement, the usual kind of stuff that any good parent does. The point is, some of these things are really, really interesting, and where we sit is problematic. If you're not doing trunk-based development and continuous delivery, then really I would question your ability to be agile. That's a very contentious point, but ultimately it's a key part of any transformation, any transition. And it's funny that over time, the desire to go faster, the fact that Amazon is releasing continuously, only very small, the fact that Netflix has built software that destroys itself, that's very sort of like I don't know, the machines are taking over the world, but they have the Chaos Monkey, you know, about Chaos Monkey. I mean, literally takes out servers and farms of servers and sees what happens. Imagine you persuading your boss, yeah, over Christmas, I'm going to write a piece of software that takes down our site systematically, because that's the kind of guy I am. Imagine that. That is just crazy talk. I wouldn't, don't. Particularly Scrum.org. Do not write a piece of software to take Scrum.org down over the summer or over the winter, over Christmas or whatever. You know, and it's interesting because you see the benefits of that. So Netflix is a heavy user of AWS, right? It's that kind of their poster child, blah, blah, blah. Did you know there was a huge AWS outage 6 months ago? I know, because Scrum.org uses AWS. It was great. And an entire region went down, right? And Netflix didn't. The only reason why I know is because my wife didn't text me instantly saying, my God, the kids are trying to watch Curious George which is usually what happens for, you know, routers, and you instantly tech support, really important, prioritized tech support. Anyway, so, it's incredible. And of course, we budget in a way that, so we're not releasing very frequently, and we're not budgeting in an appropriate way. We do annual planning, annual budgeting, and this is Peter Drucker basically saying that annual budgeting is completely waste of time, so I don't know why you do it. And that was in '92, which is years ago. I mean, I was young and could get drunk and wake up the next day at that point. So it should be simple. You know, we've got this. You know, you've got customers, then you've got people with money. They're often not customers that want to get money out of the customers, so they have some sort of desire to extract large amounts of cash from those customers, and they think that you can build something that can help them do that, call those stakeholders or whatever. And maybe you're in an organization with certain rules. It should be really, really simple, right? But mostly it feels a bit like this. You're continuously trying to keep all these bits going together. That's a Rubik's Cube for the really young people in the room. It was before we had any of those stupid games on your phone, or those fidget spinner things, we sat around with this thing for hours, and until we got so mad that we broke it and then rebuilt it and said, yeah, I did it, it's fine. Was that just me? Anyway, so what does it really look like? So, and this is why I want to stop doing slides for a minute. I don't know how to do this. Is there a button I press? What? That does not help me telling me that, by the way. Oh, that's a slider? Oh, it looks like a window. Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about. So now to go to do something completely different, because I'm kind of fed up. So prior to Scrum.org, I ran a startup called Tasktop. We got funding during my time there. I ran the engineering product side of it. And we grew from 1 Scrum team to 5 Scrum teams. Now there are 7 Scrum teams. But so when you start, it's easy. Well, it's actually incredibly hard, but the challenges are different. You have 1 team, right? And you focus it very closely on the customer. I'm giving them a hat just to look like a witch, I know. And you focus them on the thing. And everything that they need to do, they either learn to do it themselves, right? You know, usually from the wonderful World Wide Web. And Stack Overflow becomes your best friend. And you have no money, so you can't. Well, occasionally when something goes horribly wrong, you hire a consultant, this magical, very rich person that comes in and helps a little bit, maybe security, maybe UX is a great example. We're like, oh my God, we're going to React. We've got no idea. Can you give us a template and all that kind of stuff? And they come in and they swan around. And then they try to leave, making sure that you're dependent on them in some way, and you spend a great deal of time trying to not be dependent on them. But ultimately, that's easy, right? And, feedback comes in. You've got the product owner there. That's also a different hat, doesn't look different, I know, who basically moderates this conversation. The product owner then works with the board, who have money, and it's pretty easy peasy. Honestly, it is. All of the troubles that you go to it's easy. And you grow this team a little bit, and you have some strange rituals for new people joining the team. Some of them are to do with work, though, which we'll talk about. Like, you have to be able to deploy within the first 2 weeks, and you have to, and you do pairing, and you have to wear shorts even when it's really cold. Anyway, that was my teams. Anyway, then you get money from a nice VC. And suddenly, your boss says, this person goes, we've got loads of this now. So after you spend $1 million on a new website and a party, you then say, we need to actually grow this. So we start adding teams. Great, okay. And this starts getting dependencies across those teams. Oh, well, you got this, and you got that. Oh, this person's getting too busy. Okay, so suddenly you start scaling. So let's start talking about what do you do when you're in this situation? Because that's what the situation you're in. Get large doobies. Yes, like your style, man. Anyway, only in Massachusetts, Colorado, California hasn't done it yet. Anyway, after you've done that, and you've got over your 5-day hangover, you come in and you go, okay, well, obviously we do feature teams, because that's the only way to do it. Great, okay. These guys are responsible for this set of customer problems. These guys are responsible for, so you start breaking up your customer in some way. Maybe you segment them, maybe you stuff like that. Great. Then you've got a security issue. So do you hire somebody for one team? Because you've got, or do you create an infrastructure team? You create, okay, so because these guys all need this security guy, you create a separate thing, right? Well, suddenly, hang on a minute, this person then starts having a backlog from all these different, so these people are becoming dependent on it. What's the first thing that destroys agility? Dependencies. Dependencies are the evil juice. That's not a good English sentence, but you know. Who cares? I'm in Germany. I can make anything up and it sounds okay. Anyway, so you suddenly got dependency. You're like, oh no. No, we're not going to do that. We're going to put Bob, his name wasn't Bob. I can actually picture him, and he did wear shorts. We're going to put Bob in this team. And we're going to make them to build, hang on a minute. Shit, what happens when they've got problems? They have to come to this team. So now we've got a dependency across teams that we didn't have before that's got nothing to do with the customer. It gets messy, doesn't it? It gets really, really messy. So there's some very, very simple rules. So how is it? This is the reason why I'm an awful coach, because I'm meant to ask you questions, you're meant to respond, I'm meant to use you to, but I want to just tell you. So what would you do to solve this problem? The next integration team. Love it. There's a really good book coming out on December the 15th. Yes. Okay, so it's funny. It's funny you bring that up, because when we were doing, so 3 years ago, I was not working for Scrum.org, 3 and a bit years ago. And I was doing this, though. I was actually doing this. And Ken was my mentor and coach, which is really odd, because I think sometimes he just messes with you. He told me things and persuaded me to do things that I think he actually thought were wrong, but just was curious if I'd actually do them. But which you don't want as a coach, by the way. And we were talking about this. So I said, I've got this problem, Ken. What do I do? And he said, and I thought this was really interesting. He said, create an integrations team. I said, no, because that's counter to everything. He goes, no, they don't, but they don't let them touch the keyboard. I was like, hang on a minute. What do you mean? I create an integrations team, bring in this really expensive geezer in. This happened to be about security, but we can call it integrations. This really expensive geezer in, and you're telling me that I cannot let that person do any work? He goes, but measure them on the success of the output, the result, but don't let them do any coding. Not directly. Get them to work with these people. Teach them to fish. So it's really interesting you say that. Ultimately, it's about building communities of practice around these people. So we are always looking for a single answer around organization structures. And I think you said it in your presentation. Spotify is an awesome model, but works for Spotify. The model you talked about is an awesome model, works for you at the moment. There is no one-size-fits-all, but what we have learned over and over again is these people are incredibly important. It all starts with teams. And what we can spend our entire time doing is trying to make them awesomer, more awesome. And that doesn't mean getting other people to do things for them. Because though that might be a short-term thing, and sometimes you will have to do it, and of course I'm speaking black and white because I'm a crap coach, but if you get them to do the work for them, then these people become reliant on them, and then it doesn't work. So instead of fishing for them, doing security, doing infrastructure, doing all those things, you provide a support environment to help other people do things for them. So, now I can go back to the slides, but that was ultimately what we started talking about when we were talking about DevOps in Scrum, because we've already got everything in Scrum in terms of as a framework, but you'd always put the practices, the engineering practices of continuous delivery, continuous integration, test first, push left, all of that stuff on top. The challenge comes over and over again with how do you deal with the resourcing issue? Because it all begins with teams. So, all begins with teams. And so, and we want to avoid, well, actually, what we want to do is basically enable those teams to be successful. To allow that, and how we define success, honestly, as much as we like to use lots of other things like net promoter scores and the like, and so net promoter scores are a really interesting measure, but it's not success. It's an interesting measure. Ultimately, delivering customer value is the ultimate measure that we need to be measuring to. And the only way we can influence customer value is by delivering frequently to get stuff out. So, first rule. Sprint review is not a release, is not a release gate. So the first thing that the DevOps community say about Scrum over and over again is that, well, Scrum's not modern now because we can't do continuous release. Sprint review is not a release gate, never has been. What sprint review is the opportunity to get some geezers together, hopefully they know something about the product you're delivering, and say, look at this. Now, ideally, that's with data from production. Ideally, it's with A/B testing results. Ideally, it's actual real information and real data from customers using it. Definition of done. Done is done. So that means it has to be to production. It doesn't have to be, but it's as close as you can get to production as possible. The point is, if we're all trying to get that inspection and adaptation, and you're trying to inspect rapidly and frequently, you have to release frequently into an environment where you can get that response and that understanding. The other important point is that PBIs, product backlog items, need to include some measure of success. And they need to be written from a customer perspective. The reason why that's important is because it's impossible to be empirical. It's impossible to be empirical if you've got nothing to measure your experiment against. It's just impossible. So we need to build organizations that can effectively release software frequently, that can understand that when they say done, they mean done. They get that idea. They've got a support environment around that. They can inspect frequently, which requires them to have PBIs in place with measures of value, and then they need to be measuring that. Interestingly, the DevOps community was spawned out of, that came from Belgium, Philippe de Bruys, and is that how you say his name? De Bruys? Or de Bios, which is how I want to say it because it's like a computer thing, right? So Patrick de Bios wanted to create the first thing that's called agile infrastructure. Isn't that really strange? Because ultimately, which led up to DevOps days in Belgium in 2009 and etc., is that he thinks of this. So it's about getting that done software. It's about implementing done. Ultimately, that's what it is. It's to solve the water scrum fall problem. The scrum fall problem is an issue. And continuous delivery is all about that. But the challenge is that particularly as you start to grow, particularly as you become more like this, because where does support live on here? Where does support live in a Scrum organization? When you're one team, support lives in that team. Can't help but do that. But when you're two, you can imagine what my boss was like. It's like, hang on a minute. We've got this roadmap. And you're telling me that the team's having to do loads of support stuff? Why don't we just get a separate team dealing with that and concentrate these guys on the roadmap? And I said, because then they won't know anything about customers. Because it's important that they keep the connection. It's important that they have value of their code. It's important they have ownership of their product. It's important. So we ended up keeping tier 3 support inside the team. That doesn't mean they answered the, hey, switch the computer on questions, but they dealt with any product-related questions. Now, it's interesting, though, because when you look at traditional operations organizations, they're focused on stability. Now, guess what? When you've got a Scrum team that does both development and operations, and you measure them by customer value, suddenly that conversation changes completely. Stability is important. They don't want to be called in on Sunday at 2 p.m. or whatever when they're out boozing. They want a stable product, but they also want to deliver loads of new stuff to customers. So it's really, really interesting when you get this sort of real, well, how do we make it more stable whilst releasing more software? How do we automate it to the right extent? Security, help desk, all of this stuff suddenly becomes a natural kind of conversation when it's owned by the team and when you're building environments around that team. So this is what the DevOps community talk about as their principles, as their sort of like their foundations, their values. They talk about culture. Not totally sure what that is, but I think that's a very much agile type culture. They believe in automation. They believe in flow or lean, as it's also. They believe in maniacally focused on reducing waste. They believe in measurement, and they believe in collaboration. Now, those values are all very similar to Agile values. I mean, they're ultimately what the Agile Manifesto talks about as well, though this is an interesting one. Automation. What we see over and over again is that if you maniacally focus on automation for automation's sake, create an automation team, for instance. That sounds like a great idea, right? You end up not actually becoming more agile because guess what? The first exception breaks your automation and then, no, we want to keep the automation. We've invested a lot of money in this, so are you doing something wrong? You end up with this really strange dynamic. So the best people to build automation are the people that are going to benefit from that automation. And they will. But that means that you have to put guardrails into your sprints. So there's a percentage of your time that's doing automation, a percentage of your time, or technical debt, a percentage of your time doing new features, and a percentage of your time doing defects. And you are always looking at those as a product owner. You're looking at those three chunks and saying, Should I spend more time on technical debt? Will that help us release more frequently? Should I be spending more time on quality because my customers keep banging on the door? Or should I be spending more time on the next feature set? And that's the balancing act that you need to make, which is kind of interesting. This is a diagram that Jez Humble put in the DevOps survey that came out. It's interesting when you look at this. There's a couple of things that this is very agile, but what I didn't like was individual recognition. What I find that ultimately team recognition, we talked about measures earlier. I think it was in Agile HR. We have to think a lot about teams here. But everything else is pretty consistent with what you'd expect. You know, trunk-based development, no surprise there. Continuous integration, no surprise there. Test and deployment automation, no surprise there. Loosely coupled architectures, yes, because dependencies kill, no surprise there. Decision-making teams, no surprise there. Product ownership, with a strong focus on experimentation and data, no surprise there. All of these things are very Scrum-like, really. I don't know. But how do you solve this problem of self-organization? How do you solve this problem of managing those teams? Now, and this is really difficult. I had 5 teams. They now have got 7 teams at Tasktop, and we were continuously reforming and restructuring. Now, that's an interesting idea as well. One thing that we've learned with Nexus is that you need to be, one of the principles of Nexus and this idea of this scaling exoskeleton to Scrum is that you can restructure the teams every sprint if you want, inside the Nexus. Most organizations would go, oh, no, we can't do that. Why? You have to look at the problem, the sprint goals, or the Nexus goal, the goal that you're trying to achieve. Look at the team organizations. Is that going to help you? And then restructure accordingly, considering the challenges of changing teams. But ultimately, you may have to, and you allow the teams to self-organize. That could be a very interesting model. One customer is doing that today, and it's definitely very challenging. Small, obviously, we talked about that. Safe, empowered to make decisions, clear, focus on outcomes, can get stuff done. Supports by an organization that removes impediments. Leadership is all about removing impediments. The entire organization is turned upside down because customers at the top, team serving customers, everybody else is trying to help them be successful. It's a very different way of thinking about your organization. So who do you put in the teams? You know, you've got this, 7 plus or minus 2. You want to avoid dependencies, and you've got all of these things. Building modern web apps, which is what I'm more familiar with, but building modern software is really hard. But does anybody know about an organization called SpaceX? Does anybody know how many people they have in their entire delivery organization, software delivery? So these people are responsible for not the marketing stuff and the selling, but for taking a spaceship up, distributing a satellite or docking to a space station, landing a spaceship on a platform that's bouncing around in the ocean, in the Pacific Ocean. How many people do you think they need to do that?
25.
Damn, pretty close. How many? Less than 40. 35. 35 people. 35. Now, most online sites, I mean, most of what we do is not rocket science. But they literally take a spaceship up. And you've seen how it lands as well. Now, you could argue that they're big experimenters, because have you seen all the shots of it crashing? Because it did quite a few times. They lost a lot of spaceships. I think 3 or 4. They blew a lot of things up. But who cares? They still did it. It's incredible. So size is a really interesting thing. We have a sort of industrial mentality where we like strong specialists. And I just want to show you and I'll come back to something. Increasingly, what most organizations are moving to is a comb shape, where you have a broad understanding of delivering working software or delivering a product, and then you have specialist skills in a few areas. Now, that will let you be very agile. Now, there's certain situations where you cannot be agile. Maybe the level of complexity or that it's such a specialist skill, and then you have to decide, do you create a dependency? Or do you bring it, or can they somehow transfer those skills to the team? Or is there some service you can buy? You know, you have to think through these decisions. Buy, build is a lot more complex nowadays. But ultimately, you're going to be looking to creating team members that look a bit like this. Oh, I was like, you were waving at me. So that's kind of an interesting challenge as well. How do you build comb-shaped people? I've not had a comb in my house for a long time, just for the record. But how do you build comb-shaped people in an organization? Do people want to be like that?
Security engineer instead, making him do the job, making sure that the people understand how to do the job. So more and more, I think not everybody can become a rocket engineer, but you can try as much as possible.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's, so the first thing is find your best people and don't let them write code anymore. Or take off their ability to basically promote to main. Get them, they can write code, but they're not allowed to put stuff into production. Imagine what that would do. That's a crazy idea, hey? Imagine if they had to get everybody else to be as good. Imagine how much more flexible and scalable your organization would be if those skills were not in that. Now, that means that they have to feel secure that you're not going to fire them because now the skills are had by everybody else. So how do you manage to do that? I don't know. I've got no answers. But that's the kind of thing that you need to be able to do. Comb-shaped people. And that's the sort of aspiration. And the other thing is, communities of practice, or squads, tribes, guilds, chapters, whatever you want to call them. But having a support network based on these things is very, very important as well. And it means that communities of practice are no longer this nice to have. I loved your very focused. This is about facilitating retrospective community, a community of practice, or whatever you want to call it. This is what it does. This is how you become a member of it. It's a bit like open source. You know, you become a member of this project. There's some rituals to become a member of it. Then at a certain point, you can maybe start helping others if you proved yourself. You know, this kind of model is really, really exciting and really, really interesting. This idea of, but that means that communities of practice actually have a defined role in an organization, and it has measurable success. Measurable success is how many impediments in that particular area are being raised around that by the teams. That's an easy thing to measure. How much skill is being transferred? How good are these teams getting at releasing amazing software? So ultimately, we talked about this a lot earlier. It's about inspection and adaptation. It's about delivering frequently to inspect and adapt. It's about measuring the success of that you're delivering. If you talk to any of these people, any of the people that created Scrum, like Ken and Jeff, they always have thought that DevOps was part of it, always. And that isn't just because they want to be part of the trendy gang, it's because that was the only way they could actually earn money. But it's hard. It's hard to scale, even when you start from the right place. and you guys are starting from often a very different place than a startup, it's really hard to scale. You've got to make decisions, and you're going to get it wrong. So what do? Inspect and adapt through transparency. This is a complex problem. One size does not fit. So you try something. You get the security guy, you say, I'm going to bring you in, but you're not allowed to write code. Your job is to make them really good at security. And you see if it works. Then after a while, you say, why is all the security in that one team? Actually, maybe you can go and work in that team. Oh, well, hang on a minute. Actually, you're just becoming a teammate. So you could change. It's okay. But you need to inspect and adapt frequently. Focus on teams. Done means done. Very, very important concept. Developers have more definitions of done than Eskimos have of snow. Yeah, more, which is, apparently they have loads. I'm no Eskimo. Skill up those teams with security. There's some things that are obvious inside the team. Operations and security are two great examples. Build communities around some of the main sort of like threads. And you have to decide what those threads are, whether they are security, user experience, operations, performance, or whether they're skills like retrospective or design or whatever. And then the other thing that's interesting about shared services is buy it rather than use it. Don't build your own shared services model if you can. Try to buy as much of that as possible, because that ultimately is context and won't add value. And if you buy it, you have less control to make it change. And that means you create agility in the teams, because the teams, though, they know they can't phone Amazon and make them change. So they have to build around things. So it makes them a lot more flexible. That's my experience of shared services. And that's what I wanted to share with you. ScrumOps is not a thing. It's just about done. To deliver working software. You have to do it from day one or day two, as frequently as you possibly can. Inspect and adapt through transparency. Make sure that your PBIs have clear, measurable success, each individual element. Now, you may argue that definition of done should be at the PBI level. Yeah. The Scrum Guide's a little bit vague there, I would hope. It's actually not, but I'm going to pretend it is. Because, yes, maybe your definition of done should be at the PBI level. And that would help, maybe. Measurement definitely should be at the PBI, at the product backlog item level. Should definitely be at that level. And then just deliver working software. And be willing to try stuff. Maybe where security is, where performance is, where operations is. Build a help desk, get rid of the help desk. Don't worry about it. We live in a fluid world, and that means you have to have fluidity of role and fluidity of function. Agility isn't a thing that you become in terms of, I'm in this role, I'm called an agile person now. It's about being agile, which means you may have to do lots of different things, which is challenging. And that's all I was going to share. Thank you for your time. Do we have questions? Gosh, I don't know. Oh, gosh, that's going to kill somebody one of these days. It's a small group. Do we need to? Okay, I guess we do.
Now you can hear me.
Oh, gosh. Oh. Very loud.
So are there any questions? I think we have time for 2.
It doesn't have to be. It can be about anything. Well, not anything. I don't. Yes. I really don't know how to get a souffle to rise.
Yeah, my name is Andreas, and I work for a pharmaceutical company, and my question is really, are there any experience for the regulated industry? You know, I mean, we work usually for standards like GAMP. Yeah. We are using the V model, you know, requirements, verification on the other side. So now we are trying to transition from that traditional approach towards a more agile approach, and we are struggling with that. So, yeah. Any recommendations?
So, yeah, so funny, I worked a lot with Merck, which is a German pharmaceutical company, apart from the US, where it's a US complicated story. But,
I know Merck.
yes, so they, and it's interesting because they have a similar challenge. And so what they did was they built a definition of done that included everything they needed. And they went, it's really hard, isn't it? And we said yes. And so incrementally, one sprint at a time, we started delivering to a different level of done. We brought in automation. We brought in different groups to help us skill up and the like. It's interesting. The regulations are actually a lot easier than you think because it's your interpretation of them that's normally a lot harder. So what we found very quickly at Merck was that we had to bring in somebody that really knew the regulations. Not your systems were implementing the regulations. As soon as that person was involved, and they were in the sprint reviews, in fact, for a couple of sprints, that person was involved in the Nexus, the team of teams, and was heavily involved in everything. And then suddenly you realized, oh, actually you can get hang on, a Jira connected to a this would be enough. Well, yeah, of course it would be. Confluence is fine, as long as you've got the history on. You know, all of that kind of stuff became like, oh, you don't need to do this. You don't. But we started with that definition of done. We then panicked for a few sprints. We then incrementally said, okay, we're going to have to still have the external stuff. Let's incrementally start improving. And now they can release software. I mean, not as quickly as Amazon.
And was that audited by FDA?
Yes.
EMEA?
Well, the FDA, yes.
Okay.
I don't know what the European equivalent
EMEA.
is. Yeah, but yeah, they for some of their systems, for some of the things that they were building, yes. It was audited, and it works. But the beauty of it was getting that person involved, getting that definition of done very clearly understood, not pretending you could instantly from day one deliver to that definition, then incrementally moving towards that. And it worked.
Okay,
so that's
great.
my experience.
Thank you.
No worries.
Is there another one?
Any other questions, comments? You're like, go on, Dave. You're doing very well with your braces. Yes, thank you. I know. I feel like I'm 12 years old. I don't feel completely like that. I haven't got the energy. But anyway, any other questions, comments?
We have time for one more. Okay.
What is your difference between agile and lean?
Oh my God. What's the difference between agile and lean?
In a minute, Dave.
It's spelt differently. No, so really interesting. So you know the history of Scrum. So Jeff and Ken were working together in actually Burlington, Massachusetts on a medical device. That's interesting, eh? They were working in a company that got bought by GE Medical, very bizarrely, now called GE Healthcare. They were like, this is crap. We can't release software. And Jeff was the CTO, Ken was just doing the work. And what they did was they went off. Now, Ken went to DuPont and went to these, because his brother's a big DuPont guy, and went to these like these scientist geezers. And they went, what are you doing? This is a non-sequential flow. You need to be using empiricism. And he brought back all that stuff. Jeff went off to a bunch of geezers because he'd got his PhD at Harvard, and he knew these geezers that did this lean stuff that was called Toyota Way, which I can't pronounce any of their names, but the new product game. Anyway, so he went to see those geezers, and they went, what are you doing? You need to be doing lean. Obviously, you need self-organization. You need those things. And they came together, and Jeff wanted to build a massive, lean, complicated process. Ken said, no, that's stupid, we need to be empirical, that's all. And they ended up with Scrum that came out of it. So what's the difference between Agile and Lean? Loads of things and nothing. There's a lot of practices in Lean that are very manufacturing oriented. And those things aren't empirical. But there's a lot of things in Lean that benefit from empiricism. And those things are very agile. So what you need to do is you need to take the best bits of Lean, to be honest, and bring them into Agile, but empiricism is at the heart of agility. And if you're empirical, then that self-organization works brilliantly in empiricism because you've got now that sort of like feedback loop. You've got the idea of being able to stop the line, okay, you know. You've got all this, Kaizen is obviously retrospective. Kanban works brilliantly for visualizing. Cumulative flow is fantastic, 5 whys, all of these things start really helping. So it's not what is, are they the same, are they different? Well, they come from different places, but there's a lot we can learn. I'm not sure if that answered it in 1 minute, my God, and they are definitely spelt differently. Okay.
It's about trying.
Learning and realizing that you're completely stupid. Yeah, I know. Okay. I did my best.
Thanks, Dave.
Hey, no worries.
Thanks for your questions also.
Yeah, thank you. They were awesome.
We'll see you in 10 minutes again here with another great show of another great
Thanks, everybody.
session. Thank you.